At this point, I'm honored to introduce our keynote speaker. George Smitherman is the President and CEO of Cannabis Council of Canada. George brings cannabis sector expertise alongside 4 decades of political and governmental service at the local, provincial, and national levels, including roles as Chief of Staff to the Mayor of Toronto, Senior Assistant to the provincial and federal ministers, Deputy Premier of Ontario, and as Minister of Health. Since 2014, George's primary focus has been in the cannabis sector, where he led the development of a cannabis license application under the MMPR regulations. He later served as director to 2 small cannabis LPs, and most recently, he worked in a corporate role for an LP. Please welcome George Smitherman.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to participate today. I want to thank Mary-Hélène for the leadership and for Grow Opportunities leadership also. I want to say first off that I think it's important in this day and age especially to acknowledge the traditional territories, and I am in the great privilege today of being in Tiny Township, Ontario, which is the traditional territory of Anishinaabeg people, known as the Chippewa Tri-Council, and representing the First Nations of Rama, Georgina Island, and Beausoleil. And these are also traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat, and there's long Métis traditions in this area as well. I want to, as I move into my presentation, say right off the bat that I wish I had the advantage of being a little bit later, in the sense that I know that there will be a poll taking place that's going to identify quite a bit more about the audience. So I'm really hoping that my presentation is on the mark today. And I want to let everyone know that I'm very, very intimidated as a longtime consumer of cannabis, but somebody who has very, very limited proficiency with respect to growing anything really, that I feel in a certain sense in awe to be here with all of you today. That's why the first slide said thanks to all the cultivators. I really want to start off with some context with respect to COVID-19. My own personal journey in my role as CEO, President and CEO of the Cannabis Council came to life on March the 9th of this year. We had a meeting on that day, if you can imagine it, in Ottawa. Several of the companies that are members met with the minister to present a series of challenges that we're facing, some of which I'll get into in the presentation. I remember that day remarkably because within 2 days, I had taken my children out of school and really stopped doing one of my favorite things in life, which is hugging. And as a recovering politician, a former politician who is, in need and enjoys that human intervention across the table from someone, judging what's happening by the movement of their eyes or their body language and the like, I'm really feeling hard pressed now, about 6 months in, that I haven't had an opportunity to visit some of the facilities of the members of our organization. I am one of those lucky enough to have my security clearance at least, so maybe people could press me into duty. My point here really is with respect to COVID-19, the performance of the cannabis sector has been an act of tremendous leadership, and credit for the adaptation is due primarily to people that have been operating on the front lines. My apologies for that. And I think that that's both in a retail context, but in terms of the adaptation that had to occur in the growing environments. The reflection of our industry as essential with respect to declarations at the national level respecting medicinal cannabis, and all of the various actions that took place at provincial levels are, I think, also really a testament to the caliber, quality of work, and importance of the function, considering hundreds of thousands of Canadians are medicinal cannabis consumers, and many hundred thousands more growing by the days, enjoying adult recreational products. And this is reflected in point number 3. I think that it is, even though the portals to get cannabis were more restricted during the period and people were homebound and the like, they have reflected a good degree of confidence in our products. And I just want to say that all of that begins with cultivators. And as I said before, I'm in awe of the work that you do. I want to say to the my personal roots in cannabis are, well, here's the thing I want to say pointedly is that I am a former politician. I spent most of my life working in politics. For 10 years, I was privileged to be an elected member of the Ontario legislature, where I served in the Toronto Centre, Rosedale, and later Toronto Centre areas. When Premier Dalton McGuinty was elected in October of 2003, he asked me to serve as Minister of Health and Long-Term Care, and later as Deputy Premier and Minister of Energy and Infrastructure. And all of that is just to say that I am somebody who has enjoyed being in political and government life, but at the same time, I've tried to be forthright with respect to my personal views regarding cannabis. And those were strong. Well, firstly, as I've declared to many people who want to meet me for a drink, I said, well, why don't we, meet for some other form of consumption? I'm trying to destigmatize our products, and also be forthright about my own adult recreational consumption, and the fact, of course, that I've transitioned over time from the so-called legacy markets to having a tremendous joy of going to many of our retail establishments, and also ordering online and enjoying such an array of products. I don't fancy myself a connoisseur. Some people use that title. I could say that there's not that much cannabis that I've consumed that I didn't find some pleasure or enjoyment from. And I know that's not everybody's take. I want to say very, very clearly that with respect to cannabis as a medicine, my roots are at Church and Wellesley in downtown Toronto, and that in the 1990s was a place where I operated a film processing business. In those days, the film processing business was sadly very often called upon to produce many pictures for memorial services, because people in that community, gay men, were dropping really left, right, and center. It was a terrible, terrible time. And I came to know that cannabis as a medicine, in terms of helping to address some of the most challenging effects of HIV and AIDS, wasting, and the difficulty of maintaining body weight. I think this was one of the early indications, and led me to be distinctly in favor of cannabis as a medicine. I really, I'll go back, I should have left off the last slide, is I know that there's more than one former politician who's managed to make their way into the licensed cannabis environment. And I just want to try and do all I can to differentiate myself, as an example, from Julian Fantino, who maybe came a little bit late to his interest in cannabis, either as a medicine or for recreational purposes. My track record's a bit different. I was really so privileged to be able to take on the role at the Cannabis Council. It's the National Organization for Licensed Producers. It's sometimes called C3. It's evolved over time to reflect the fact that our cannabis environment in Canada has evolved so much, also with adult recreation joining the hard-fought rights to medicinal cannabis. And we have to say, and I knew so many people, many of them passed sadly before their time, who were champions for constitutional recognition of the right to possess and consume cannabis for medicinal purposes. And I can think about many of those people who were important role models for me in the context of advocacy. Our mission really is to act as the national voice for members in the promotion of industry standards. We're trying to grow to responsibly grow the cannabis sector. We want to ensure that the legal cannabis industry has a reputation that's sterling. And we want to serve as an important resource to be able to help as conversations go on about medicinal and cannabis for non-medicinal purposes. So we have a very, very strong focus in Ottawa. It's really it's very interesting if you think about the way Canada has formed and the impact that had on the model that we've emerged with here. Is got a lot of those Canadian challenges where You have a significant amount of the regulation occurring at the national level, and of course, tremendous influences through the provincial and territorial agreements. So it does make for a really, really complicated regulatory environment in which to work. But my membership asks that my focus be primarily on Ottawa. So, we think that the values of being a member are, especially with respect to Ottawa, that you have the opportunity to align with others in advocacy and lobbying efforts. And I think there's a lot of work on this front to be done by all of us, because I find that even in an environment like Ottawa, where the government of the day is the government that I think quite courageously brought forward adult rec, it's not it doesn't mean that has washed away every bit of stigma that might exist within governmental circles around cannabis. We have a lot of work to do to create a more understanding environment in Ottawa that especially gives recognition to the fact that our cannabis sector is so well spread out across the country. A lot of industries tend to concentrate just in one place or the other, and I think a remarkable feature of our cannabis sector is how spread out it is. One of our more active members is Myrna Gillis from Aqualitas on Cape Breton Island, and she's really, really driven home to me the economic impact of our sector. We're obviously following the bouncing ball with respect to regulation and legislation changes in Ottawa, and our goal and responsibility is to help members be aware of those changes. And because we have a statutory review embedded in the legislation, obviously there's going to be a lot of work done and a lot of responsibility to fulfill to prepare our sector for that conversation and to try and create the conditions where we can build on the successes that we've achieved, make sure that we have good success domestically going forward, maximize the potential for Canada to leverage its first mover advantage through more proactive international activities and such. And a lot of member companies enjoy the opportunity to meet other companies in the environment of an association. It's obviously a very, very competitive sector now, especially where there are fewer places for the meet and the mingle, where oftentimes we meet people from other companies, etc. The association is one more place where people have a chance to meet individuals from other companies. And I think that it's very, very important also that we as an industry association help to be proactive in important matters which are on the minds of people. I can't help but note that I've seen just in the last couple of days, as I've been watching quite a bit of television, yes, television. I'm down to 40 channels, but I know some people that's a throwback. But the one thing that it gave me a chance to see in the last couple of days was some, I think, rather remarkable advertising from Old Navy, which goes some measure to reflect gender as non-binary and these kind of voices from significant entities, etc. I think these are going to be big issues for our industry going forward. There's already, with respect to diversity, some shortcomings that have been highlighted. I think sustainability is just another example of something that there's going to be a tremendous pressure and opportunity for industry-wide solutions. And I think it's some of these things are reputational for our sector. It's not, I think, lost on many of us that providing our products in containers which are child resistant sometimes works against our best instinct as companies or as an industry to try and reduce our reliance on packaging. And these are examples of challenges that we're going to see, recycling and different recycling programs that are necessary for different components and the like. These are all going to be issues that we're going to be addressing a lot, and where people can find value in the association. I just want to say that in a certain sense, I think it's a bit like this, is that pressures or pains that you may be communicating as individuals working within Bill C-45 right at the right on the front lines, literally forced to, find the capacity to introduce physical distancing while still producing through your crop cycles. The changes that the challenges that made around having enough security authorized individuals to be on site. When those pressures are felt on the front lines, they make their way up through individuals in your organizations and right into the rubrics of the association. And we work very directly with Health Canada at all levels to try and pound away and find solutions, for things that are impactful. But really, I think that what I want to underscore here is that advocacy is, I think, something that as an association and as an industry, we need to really, really be promoting, because I think there is yet a lot that is to be learned. And so to the extent that your companies are comfortable with it, like I'll be promoting across the board, or rather, not across the border, that might even be illegal. I'll be across the board trying to encourage companies to be more proactive in reaching out at the local level and building relationships, because we need more allies with members of parliament in Ottawa. Now, they're very focused on local things. So if you're a grower that's locally giving leadership in your facility, you have a very interesting story to tell. So I hope that I just generally encourage advocacy, whether you're a member of C3, if you're in our cannabis industry, if you're making a living in our industry, it's really important for people at the decision-making level to be able to associate you with an operation, with jobs, with economic impact. And I know visits and stuff like that are difficult under our regulation, and they're especially difficult under COVID. But I really do want to impress on people that our nascent industry really does need as many people as possible to reach out and advocate. We got the law on our side, but we have, broadly speaking, the public on our side, but we have a lot of work to do to create a more sympathetic understanding, and also an understanding of the economic upside and potential of our sector, the growth that I'll talk about a little bit more as we go forward. And I think that, one of the things in an association context is that you can be an influencer in the kinds of things that the association is working on. And I think that no matter the size of the company, what's interesting is that there is one point of commonality, which is you got a license. You went through that process, which I know way, I shouldn't say I know too much about. You all know way more than me, but I've seen what that takes, the dedication that it takes. I've seen the hardship associated with the long approvals and cash flow challenges of carrying buildings for years before there was revenue and all of that. So we have a great story to tell, but the one thing is we need to create a little more sympathy for it, in part reminding people that we're a startup, because I think sometimes they confuse us as like the alcohol industry or something that's been around for a long time. I maybe talk about these points a little bit more as I move through the slides. So an example of a benefit that comes from being associated with our association, and this is something that we're just in the process of finalizing, is related to cannabis standard for medicinal cannabis. I told you before that I was a Minister of Health in Ontario. What that means is that this is going back a number of years now, the drug budget in Ontario was about $3.5 billion. I'm sure that's over $5 or $6 billion now, and I'm sad to say that we're not getting a piece of that action so far. And I don't think that's right, because I believe fundamentally that we have the case to make about cannabis as a medicine, and especially as a medicine that's an improvement over other medicines that patients are sometimes taking. We have a lot of work to do to make that the case. And the association was approached by somebody that I know, a woman named Helen Stevenson, who's the lead of this company, Reformulary, that has developed Cannabis Standard. When I was a Minister of Health, Helen Stevenson ran that same drug program, and what she knows about is formularies. Well, private companies have formularies also, and the company Reformulary develops specific formularies for individual private businesses. Cannabis Standard and C3's participation in it is a vehicle that allows licensed producers and growers especially to take pride in particular products that they market as medicinal and to get those onto formularies, with the encouragement that follows being getting patients to provide more data that further enhances the evidentiary trail behind the indication. And this whole cannabis standard is developed with prescribers in mind, because we know that there's a real challenge out there with a more limited than we'd like number of prescribers that have taken an interest in medicinal cannabis. Cannabis standard can be an important bridge to enhance their uptake of prescribing, because it's developed in a fashion that's consistent with the way that they're used to receiving it. And all of this, all of the indication data and such that is presented is subjected to quite an internal clinical review, like very impressive array of clinicians that have been involved in reviewing various data. So our association will be talking about this more to follow. This is just something that we're moving forward with just in the last short while. But I think that one of our goals and objectives is to grow the medicinal cannabis market in the country. And I think that this could be a helpful step forward. Well, these are some of the commercial pressures that I'm hearing about, and if some of them are familiar, if some of them may be familiar to you and to your companies, obviously shelf life issues are a significant concern. We've seen, quite a bit of product write down on the part of companies. I find this, I find that to be, a pretty challenging state of affairs. I'm going to have a chance coming up in September to represent licensed producers on a call with the provincial level agencies that are buying cannabis, and to just try and create a little more understanding about these challenges on expiry dates, especially when you link that to things like excise stamps and the real challenges of having to try to reposition product to another market where maybe there was more uptake or what have you. These things are obviously from a commercial standpoint quite challenging. There's a great story out there in the sense that we're growing cannabis sales, and we're also seeing quite a good uptake in, quite a bit of increase in 2.0 with tremendous potential yet to go. But at the same time, we're achieving these growing sales even while some prices on flower have decelerated quite rapidly. And I think that's going to be a challenge going forward to make sure that the cannabis that is being purchased actually has enough revenue in it to pay the bills. So I think that's been a concern at a commercial level. Some companies are challenged by the regulation with respect to equivalencies. I try to point out to anyone that I can, especially on a Friday before the long weekend, I like to tell them I'm going down to the LCBO with a pickup truck and I'm going to buy every case of tequila in the place. And the only thing that they're going to ask me is, do I need help getting it to the vehicle? And then I'm going to go over to the local cannabis shop and I'm going to get 5 adult cannabis beverages or 30 grams of dried flower. I mean, we've got some work to do around that, but it's creating some real challenges. In a certain sense, it may have the public health impact of, pushing people towards higher concentrates, etc. So that's an issue we're working on. Branding limits are obviously something that people raise over and over again. The resolution to that, we'll see. That's going to be challenging going forward. But I have highlighted to health officials, and people should send me emails and let me know their point of view on this, because I don't have the science behind this. I have the personal experience, though, which tells me that in an environment where you can really only put THC and CBD on your products, where those are I know that you can supply more information by other means, but not easily. I do feel that in a certain sense, that we've created a situation where people are just driven to purchase cannabis on the basis of just how strong it is. And I know that, you know, companies have had to write down cannabis here deemed not strong enough, that in Uruguay would be illegal for being too strong, where I think they have caps of 13 or 14%. Somebody will know better than me, but something like that. So I think that as an author of 10 pieces of legislation, the one thing I know is this thing called unintended consequences. And I make the public health argument that an unintended consequence of not being able to communicate more as companies to clients about products is that we're just mediating the purchase of cannabis on the basis of how strong it is and how inexpensive it is. And I don't think that does very proper justice to a lot of the great work and growing that's going on out there. So that's an issue. Excise stamps I touched on before. It's a difficult fix, even though it seems logical, because it requires the provinces to want to fix it. And they like it because they used to get screwed on tobacco collection until they introduced these more province-oriented stamps or something like that. The point is, there's roots at the provincial level of distrust towards federal tax collection, which influences the necessity or the current necessity of having all these stamps. We keep beating the drum on it, and it's something that people, if they're as irritated by it as some, they should continue to speak up about. But the resolution is one of those complicated Canadian resolutions where province is almost like changing the amending formula for the Constitution. The last one I'll mention is security clearance, CTLS, and general service standards. Obviously, these are things that we're always talking to Health Canada about. And in the COVID context, we sure have struggled because our leading department is also leading these really critical initiatives related to the pandemic. And we have seen the relocation of some staff to other roles and such. And that's going to be a challenge. That's going to be a challenge for us on an ongoing basis. But we have to, we have to fight for what we can get with respect to service standards, and be constantly pushing and reminding them of that. Some of the headwinds that are out there, I don't have to tell all of you. Liquidity is a real challenge, and regulatory cost burdens are right up there too. On this price degradation thing, like increasingly we can show that it's markups and taxes and such that are at the heart of the pricing, and that we as an industry, as a sector, have done exceedingly well at reducing costs so as to be competitive and to bring more of our brethren legacy consumers across the line to be purchasing products from licensed producers. And then, of course, we're a startup sector. This goes back to the sympathy I was speaking about before. There's no shortage of competition, even though we already feel the competition. Every Friday, there's another list that comes out of somebody got this sales license or what have you, and we applaud them all because we know how hard they've worked. And then on the other hand, perhaps we say, oh goodness gracious, one more competitor. So I know it's tough out there, and stigma is real, and we have to confront it with good information. I think we do have good information, and that's the helpful bit about it. I'll talk more about that going forward. Wind at our backs. Well, consumers like our products. They like your products. I like your products too. I wish I could encourage you to send me samples, but I know that that's not possible. I once said, oh, I can't wait to have a chance to try some of your products. And the person said, well, I'll send some along. And I said, well, unless you're going down to the retail shop to send them to me, just leave it to me to get them for myself. Retail storefronts are increasing. Ontario had a series of hiccups that were dispiriting to everybody, no doubt, but I'm I could say that the progress is pretty substantial. I could say that I've rarely seen a regulator like the AGCO, I think quite focused on its mission. I can't really blame them for the hiccups that occurred in the earlier processes because those came from uncertainties at the political level and obviously changing approaches from the Kathleen Wynne to the Doug Ford government. But as Ontario goes, we've got a good head of momentum. Other provinces relatively improving also. Quebec is a place where there could be quite a few more stores. The government there having, you know, a different approach to cannabis than some other places, and I think that's a challenge that companies are working on individual. I think policymakers begin to recognize the value of the industry. You can start to see the implication of cannabis in agricultural production. We start to break down long-standing barriers with with BDC. But I'm clear to tell governmental parties, don't kid yourself that these startup companies, most 75% of them with less than 2 years of revenue behind them, are immediately going to be able to get support from BDC just because they're no longer outwardly hostile. And sometimes our friends in government, and I was there too, like to let themselves off a little bit too easily, thinking that BDC announcement that probably you all saw months back, which says that our companies can now at least ask for, backing from government resources. I haven't heard about too many companies that have made success there. And if there are out there, I would really please encourage you to get a hold of me because I'd like to be up to date on that. I think the other thing, the wind at our backs notion, is that the full potential of the plant is still being realized, both in the context of growth of 2.0 products, which obviously are challenging to develop, but still tremendous potential. And also the potential of the plant with respect to CBD, something that we've got to look forward to. So on a going forward basis, we want to try and enhance the prospect that the industry is operating as a collective in areas that are important. We want to push for quality and convenience of access for our consumers, and we want to serve also to make sure that Canada fulfills its full potential as a leading example to international jurisdictions looking to legalize cannabis. And we have a lot of work to do there because that's an example where the national government, which took what I said before as the courageous step for our sector, hasn't been that forthright globally to put up their hand and lead the conversation at the microphone. So we'll be working with them to let them know that that's important to do and that there are jobs in that kind of an approach. And, we want to keep working with all of you to bring those legacy consumers across the line and to work to create a more equitable cannabis experience. So industry, I should say. So with that, I will look forward to I usually say that by this point, I hope that I've been suitably provocative, that people are going to fire some tough questions at me. But I just want to close by saying it's been a privilege to have a chance to participate today. And I look forward to your questions that you might pose now or the emails that might follow. And you can see my email address and coordinates are noted on this slide. So back to the moderator to fire away with the questions, and thanks again.
Thank you, George. That was a great rundown of what the Cannabis Council of Canada is doing to help the industry. We've got a couple of questions, and we have time for questions from our audience. So we have one talking about COVID-19. You mentioned, so one attendee is asking, how concerned are the growers about theft during this pandemic in your communications with the industry?
Theft at the growing level?
Yeah, I guess theft at the facilities or at the retail level as well. Like, what are you hearing?
I haven't heard any expressions of particular concerns. Of course, the Health Canada data collection really does put pressure on LPs to show where the product has gone. I did see stories about from the United States of a dispensary or perhaps more that were broken into during some of the protests and how insurance might or might not be supporting those things. But I haven't heard that as a particular concern.
Yeah. So I have a question for you. We've seen in recent months sort of the downsizing or lots of the cuts, and or some analysts would say it's right sizing. And wondering what your thoughts are in terms of that evolution that's happening in the industry right now, where sort of companies seem to be uh, streamlining their operations, cutting. Is this a step in the right direction? Are we right sizing, as analysts have said, or is this something else? Like, what are your thoughts?
It, it's hard to say that it's a step in the right direction because uh, I always process these things first and foremost through the emotional disruption that occurred for individuals, many of whom had been, digging deep for a long time, pardon the expression, to make, to build up companies. But on the other hand, we can see that it's a feature of the times, both in terms of the challenges around liquidity demanding that companies move towards reducing cash flow burn and cash flow positivity and profitability. And I think also, and this is something that I explain to people, is that I think one of the phenomenons of the Health Canada licensing process was that they never, there were never particularly volumes associated with licensing. It was kind of like, well, if you can get the capital and you can meet all of our requirements and you can put this application forward, eventually you might get a license, irrespective of what that aggregated capacity added up to. And I think in other cases also, people have learned hard lessons that some growing environments are more suitable for their style of business than others. So for all of those reasons, we've seen a lot of it. I'm no predictor exactly of the future, but I do think that the prospects are there for operational consolidations amongst companies. Many people have speculated about that, and who know better than me. This is why it's really important that we find new market and look for opportunities for growth, also to promote broader array of products related to 2.0, CBD with more exportable capabilities, try to address equivalencies and advance that beverage market. These are opportunities where we can try and grow the sector and try to make sure that we're growing employment for Canadians and trying to grow that employment across the country, which is an interesting feature, as I said, of our cannabis sector.
Right. And along those lines of, making the industry more competitive. So I have a question here. The Aboriginal community in several provinces is selling cannabis with little oversight by Health Canada or accountability, and is essentially creating a venue for black or gray market product, thereby drawing significant revenue away from legitimate LPs. How do you enforce regulation over this rogue industry, given the current sensitivities concerning reconciliation, etc.?
Well, for my liking, probably not to talk only about enforcement and not to talk only about rogue industry, because I have the experience of many years in government and post-government watching uh, enforcement around tobacco in an Indigenous context. I think that what I would say are two things that people could look to for that they could be instructive. The first is in Ontario, uh, they did move forward with an opportunity for First Nations reserve communities to have AGCO style licenses. And I think they're doing some important work at the retail side with some Indigenous communities. And I'm hopeful about what those outcomes might be. I've also had the chance to be influenced by Isidore Day. He's a former chief from Serpent River in Ontario, and I worked closely with him around green energy initiatives, which provided a lot of economic opportunities for Indigenous communities. And he's been advancing concepts as well that would try to find the way for cannabis that's sold in retail environments on territorial jurisdiction of First Nations to be LP grown cannabis. That's the long-term objective that we all have. These are very difficult issues to manage, especially because of that Canadian dynamic, which split the regulation where you've got the retail and distribution in the provincial quarter and other things nationally. It's not easy going for sure, but I do see a few hopeful signs out there, and I'm trying to keep myself as aware as I can of the progress that's being made. Obviously, I've seen the traffic that's generated by some of those stores, and I want those consumers, I want them buying your cannabis. So that's my motivation. But the steps to get there are challenging ones in our country. But I think there's some progress afoot, and I want to try and support those things.
Right. So along the lines of the illicit marketplace, so we have a question here, and beyond enforcement, what's the council doing, or what's the industry? What role can the industry play in terms of cutting down or eliminating the illicit market? So beyond the enforcement aspect of it.
Well, the first thing that we focus on is making sure that people that want to buy our cannabis have opportunities to do so. So, I'm here in Central Ontario, and it's exciting to watch because, in a place like Collingwood, where I've been buying cannabis of late, there's one store, another one coming soon, a few more in the pipeline, and similarly. So that's the first thing, is that we want to push and make sure that people have the opportunity to access our excellent products, both online legally as they should, and through retail environments. I think at the national level, we bring to the attention of the government, not Health Canada in this case, but public safety, that the irony that they have regulated us very intensely, and it's fine and it's understandable, and we're doing our darndest to work within it. But at the same time, others are perpetuating sales like online sales with utilizing the full network of financial services. We can't even get banking. We can't even get bank accounts for some retailers at normal banks, and the Interact system is the backbone of some illicit online purchasing. So that's another area where we focus attention. And one area that I'm hearing a lot about, it hasn't been one that we've spoken up so much about, but I'm hearing from a lot of constituents and members of parliament about the overgrown, the medicinal that's being grown absent of significant regulation and safeguards, and also safeguards against that making its way into black market sales. So those are some of the things that we've been attending to or hearing about.
Another question here. What do you see are the key factors for cultivators to work on to create a thriving business?
Oh, that's more that's more in your hands than in mine. But obviously, the competitive marketplace is there's a lot of options. There's a lot of options out there. So being able to create products that have a unique reputation and the like is important. That's why I suggest, if you have a medicinal focus, that Cannabis Standard might be a place to actually bring a little more attention to individual products that you're growing. And of course, I don't have to tell you that there's pressure with respect to cost, and that's not likely to abate. And I could just bow down and say, like, I'm so impressed with the work that's being done, the cannabis I'm consuming, the variety of it and the like. So keep it coming. Send me any suggestions by email, and I like to sample around a little.
So you've been involved in, I guess, connecting with the regulators, meeting with them. What are your thoughts? One question here: do you think they will phase out the ACMPR and transition them into micro?
I really couldn't speculate on that at the moment. I think that we would hope to have some important signals from Health Canada on matters like that, but I do fear that because of COVID, that we're going to see a slower uptake by Health Canada on these major positions with respect going forward. But I do think that there's pressure on that licensing model, no doubt, and the absence of safeguards and such is something that's going to come up more and more. But whether they've taken stock of it to the point of formulating opinions or not, I'm just not certain.
I'm wondering if you can expound. You mentioned that regulators are getting a little bit more sympathetic with the industry. Can you expand on that a bit? Can we expect them? I know they in recent amendments to their regulation seems like they're more willing, they're more open to listen to the industry. So can you expound a little bit more on that? And what are you hearing from the policymakers in Ottawa?
Well, I didn't mean to imply that they were being very sympathetic. Actually, my experience has been at the political governmental level in Ottawa. Not talking about Health Canada staff. Less sympathy for our sector than I would like to see. Less willingness by other government departments to champion our sector for the growth that it offers. So I think we have work to do. I do think that Health Canada deserves credit, and I gave it to them repeatedly. Thank them for the flexibility that they did provide with notice, I think on 2 different occasions earlier on in COVID. And what I said to them is that before we revert to some old normal, it would be wise to have a conversation with the industry about regulatory flexibility that occurred during the period that might get locked in on a go-forward basis in a way that's beneficial both to Health Canada and to the sector, because the costs of regulation are quite significant, and the costs for them to be the regulator are significant also. And we both share a desire to be more efficient. It may not seem like it in a sense, but that organization, just like our organizations, is under pressure all the time to try and find more efficient ways to deliver their mandate. So coming out of COVID, I don't know what coming out of COVID is, considering that department, is talking about 2022. So I just think a big challenge for us is going to be leadership attention within Health Canada, as long as COVID's presence is as prominent as it is. That's going to be a challenge. But we have a lot of work to do to create a more sympathetic understanding at the political class. That's why I was really promoting the concepts of more local advocacy. We need more members of parliament to hear the word cannabis and understand that means local jobs, or that means increasingly medicines that work for my mom's bad knee or what have you. So that's, I think, an important obligation that we all have as a regulated sector, is to really work on local relationships. In politics, they say all politics is local. It's really very, very true. It's not some adages are over relied upon. I don't believe that one can be. And remember, now we're in a very precarious environment in Ottawa. I mean, in the sense that it's a minority parliament, and the prospects for an election interfering also in a Bill C-45 review context are also quite significant. So politicians will be quite locally focused, and it's a good time to build relationships with them. Chambers of commerce, cannabis companies should be getting awards all over the place for the job creation that they've done. I know it's been a little up and down in some situations, obviously some hardship there, but nevertheless, in the last little while, few sectors in Canada have created jobs like we have, and we have many, many more to create going forward. And we need to position ourselves to tell that story and to be seen as an industry that can be a champion of growth, not just one to be regulated.
We have time for one more question. You mentioned public education. So the government plays its part, or to an extent, about educating the public about the risks, the health risks, and stuff like that. What role does industry play in terms of educating the public about cannabis, the cannabis industry, and cannabis products?
I think that we have a lot of responsibility to especially make sure that the national government is aware of the successes of the regulatory framework. So in a certain sense, sounds like I'm not answering the question directly because I'm talking about government, but I think in getting stronger relationship with our consumers and understanding better what has taken shape, we will see that we can provide the government with better information about the successes that we've achieved. So the government communication is defensively positioned, appropriately so. When you're in government, it's a risk-averse environment. When you're doing something like legalizing cannabis, you're going to double down on risk aversion. That's the approach some people call belts and braces, that the accountant wore a belt and also had braces, like double protection against pants falling down or what have you. Well, this is kind of the approach that government brings. We can show now, several years into this legislative, I'm going to say experiment, it's not an experiment, but that on many of the areas where people most raised concerns, youth consumption, driving under the influence, many other areas, that we can actually work with the public to see how we're doing in those areas, communicate with them directly around those things, and relate those experiences to government. A thing that makes some people upset, at least one of your panelists and I talked about it on Twitter or something like that, is the government's paying for advertising that's perpetuating the idea, that's using gummies in a context which is not legal, that is characterizing gummies in shapes and forms that we're not allowed to. And to me, it was like, I know what they're getting at, and we have a bigger problem, don't we, with people consuming, with kids accessing illegal edible products. Seems to be, the health and safety focus that needs more attention. But here, this commercial was talking, and to the average individual that's not, that's listening to that radio ad, but's not buying edible products or not investigated the 2.0 marketplace, they aren't aware. That commercial, in a certain sense, is misleading them about the legal framework in Canada. So I'm not sure I've answered the question perfectly well there, but I think we do have a significant obligation. At the same time, the companies have got a lot of restriction in the ability to communicate. And people sometimes said to me, why didn't all the cannabis companies take out ads promoting diversity in the context of Black Lives Matter and all of that? And it totally makes sense on every level, because that's a community that's a stalwart community of consumers, and has been subjected over time to charges around possession and the like that's ridiculous. So, but I said, well, we're not allowed to run, like, advertising restrictions and such really do hamper the do create challenges even in that context for companies. Anyway, we look forward to being able to communicate more. And also, the cannabis standard is one thing that we'll be able to communicate proactively to Canadians. You're trying to figure out, is medicinal cannabis for me? That, I know there are many places that one can go, but this is kind of narrated through clinicians in a way that I think could be powerful for people out there. Also, we'll try to develop more content that can help to inform Canadians and to give Canadians and the government encouragement that we've done well by it. It's not been perfect, but when you look at the risks that people raised at the front end of legalization, the speeches that people said about craziness in the streets and all of this. The response here has been a mature, responsible Canadian response. And I think that the government, in a certain sense, needs to be reminded of those successes. So that's some of the work that we have to do.
That's great. So thank you so much again, George, for taking the time to be with us today and answering all our questions. George's contact information is in the slide in front of you. So if you have some more questions for him, definitely send him an email and he'll be happy to answer. Thank you, George.